in just under 5 hours, the whole state of Victoria will be back in lockdown for the next 5 days. The trigger point was the discovery that at least 3 people caught the virus at the footy at the MCG on Saturday. Late this afternoon, the Premier said there was no other choice, and in a veiled swipe at New South Wales said now is not the time for dawdling. From midnight, Victorians will go into lockdown number 5 until 11:59 p.m. next Tuesday night. The state will revert to the same settings as last month's lockdown. Where possible, schools will switch to remote learning tomorrow. Regional areas not affected by the outbreak may get a reprieve, with the Premier promising to lift restrictions in those areas ahead of time, if possible. State political reporter Richard Willingham joins us now. Rich, the Premier used the term short and sharp a few times during his press conference late this afternoon. Is this a case of 5 days or more like at least 5 days?
Well, that's a really important question, Tam. Acting now because they really want to avoid getting into a situation like we're seeing north of the border in Sydney. But he did concede today that this may last longer than 7 days, 5 days. He couldn't guarantee it wouldn't go longer. Of course, that's the experience of that lockdown we had just last month, which was described as a circuit breaker for 1 week, and we know it went for 2 weeks. Now, this has all happened this morning. This morning they were pretty confident they wouldn't have to do a lockdown, but the emergence of cases at the MCG has really spooked them and spurred this action. Here's the Premier discussing today's strategy.
5 days of pain is much better than 5 weeks or 5 months, and this is what we have to do. Victorians know that. I'm not expecting them to be happy about it. I'm not happy about it. But this is where we're at, and I haven't got the luxury of doing what's popular or doing half measures. Do it properly, and that's what we're going to do.
Now, there's questions about how sustainable this strategy is of going to a lockdown every time there's an outbreak, especially when you consider the mental health impacts and the impacts on business. But the Premier makes the point that this may always be a viable option while vaccination rates are so slow. Now, state political reporter Bridget Rollison explains how it's all going to work.
Here we go again.
The Chief Health Officer and the Public Health team have recommended to me and my Cabinet colleagues that we lock Victoria down.
The 5-kilometre radius is back, and there are only 5 reasons to leave your home as Victoria enters its 5th lockdown.
These cases started in New South Wales, but I'm determined that they'll end here, because we will put this out with the help of every single Victorian.
The rules are the same as last month's lockdown. Retail is closed and online learning is back.
If you were authorised to work then, you will be authorised to work now. If you were closed then, you will be closed now.
The strict measures enforced after transmission between strangers at the MCG.
The fact of the matter is that it is moving so fast and it's so infectious.
A man in his 60s who lives at the Ariel Apartments in Maribyrnong is believed to be the source of 3 other infections in the MCC members reserve at the Carlton-Geelong AFL match on Saturday night. They weren't sitting together.
Struck it pretty well. Oh, he loves it. You cannot strike it any better than that.
MCC members have been urged to get tested.
Whatever you're doing at the moment, stop doing it. Please come and get tested so we can get that information and get you safe and secure.
One of those cases is a grade 4 student at St Patrick's Primary School in Murrumbeena in Melbourne's southeast. The school was the 3rd to close in the past 24 hours, and all students have been ordered to get tested.
People know in Victoria more than any other part of the country, 5 days of pain is much better than 5 weeks or 5 months.
There are now 18 cases in total linked to the removalists and family from New South Wales. In the past 72 hours, contact tracers have identified more than 70 exposure sites, and 6,500 close contacts are in isolation.
But as fast as they're moving, they're just keeping pace with this virus. They're not getting in front of it.
And Victorians have responded quickly too, with huge lines at testing sites across the state.
Victorian businesses again suffer at the hands of the virus being carried in from another state.
The state opposition says lockdowns should be a last resort, and the government's pulled the trigger early.
We can't keep living like this. We can't keep going into lockdown every time we get 10 or 12 cases in the community.
Masks are once again mandatory indoors and outdoors, and there's a good reason why. One man who spent 5 hours with the removalists who sparked this outbreak was wearing a mask and is yet to catch the virus. His neighbours who weren't wearing masks have tested positive. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
Richard Willingham's still with us. Rich, the Premier flagged that he'll be talking to the Prime Minister tonight about more support for businesses and workers. What can they expect?
The Premier says there'll be an announcement as early as tomorrow about business support, but it should be kept in mind that many thousands of businesses are still waiting for business support from the state government from the last lockdown. Now, the Premier and the Prime Minister are due to speak again tonight about more support after the Prime Minister flagged that more federal support is coming for all Australians that are affected by lockdowns, and it will come after 7 days. There's a new federal support payment that will be paid after 7 days and it'll be paid in arrears. Now, given that Victoria is hoping this will only a 5-day lockdown, the government is hoping that there can be some sort of pro rata payment. Now, the federal government is open to providing that, we understand, as long as the state chips in half of that. Political editor Andrew Probyn reports.
12 million Australians will be in lockdown from midnight. Australia's two biggest cities and surrounds, so often rivals, united by a common hardship.
Rules that you think might be appropriate one time sometimes have to change.
Since JobKeeper ended in March, there have been several adjustments to federal financial support.
You adapt, you change, you update, you streamline, you make it more simple.
From now on, workers affected by a lockdown greater than 7 days will receive up to $600 a week, including the first week backdated. The liquid assets test is ditched altogether, and businesses will start receiving up to $10,000 a week after the first fortnight if their turnover falls by at least 30%, split 50-50 between the Commonwealth and the state, but administered by the federal government.
We have to set up rules that apply right across the country.
Scott Morrison will put the new plan to National Cabinet tomorrow, along with a proposal for the states and Commonwealth to equally split the cost of income support for lockdowns shorter than 7 days.
We expect that the Commonwealth Government will step up and help those people who need that help.
The new arrangements anticipate more lockdowns until the vaccination rate is much higher.
Until we get the population fully vaccinated, we do not get to the other side of COVID-19.
I imagine we'll be doing very well if we get to 70% of people wanting to be vaccinated.
The federal government knows a higher proportion of vaccination would give greater confidence, encouraging everyone to have at least one by year's end, the goal.
If you wanted one, you could have had one. So you've had a conscious decision about whether you've sought to protect yourself from what is a very virulent virus.
It wasn't long ago that the Prime Minister was commending Gladys Berejiklian's gold standard approach to avoiding lockdown in New South Wales. So today is significant because Scott Morrison has surrendered to the realisation that sometimes there's no option, given the speed with which the Delta strain can spread. And importantly, the PM's now prepared to share the cost of lockdowns from the start, long or short. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
Now, for more on the cases that were transmitted at the MCG on the weekend, I'm joined by Jessica Longbottom. So, Jess, what was it about those cases that sparked such concern from authorities?
Yeah, Tam, look, we have had positive cases attend games at the MCG before, but we've never had a case of transmission. It's not usually a venue that overly concerns contact tracers. It's well ventilated. Most of it is open air, and you don't usually see transmission in that context. The fact that they've seen 3 stranger-to-stranger transmission, what they label fleeting transmission, really has them concerned. They're concerned it could have spread to other people who were here at the Level 2 MCC Members Reserve on Saturday afternoon. What's also concerning them is at least one of those people infected today wasn't even sitting in the direct area around the initial positive case. The virus is also moving very fast. One of the people infected on Saturday has already gone on to infect 2 of his family members. So certainly this whole scenario played a large part in calling the lockdown this afternoon.
Jessica Longbottom, thank you. Well, regional Victoria won't be spared from the statewide lockdown after COVID cases were detected in the southwest, central and northern parts of the state. Many of the towns caught up in the latest outbreak haven't seen active cases since last year, but residents have turned out in big numbers to get tested today. The Premier has hinted that if no further cases emerge, regional areas could be released from lockdown sooner than Greater Melbourne. Stephen Schubert reports.
Testing times in Barwon Heads, a 2-hour wait to get a test in the seaside town, with exposure sites quickly stretching across the state.
2 chains of transmission, at least one of those chains is moving very actively and very aggressively across the state.
The Barwon Heads Footy Club is now a Tier 1 exposure site for players and coaches after a case attended a local match, and the primary school is shut after a student tested positive, linked to the Ariel apartments in Maribyrnong. Exposure sites were also declared in the Geelong suburb of Warn Ponds, with a petrol station and a nearby stationery shop closed. Further north, Bacchus Marsh Grammar closed its campus after a confirmed case. And in Balan, locals have been out in droves to get tested. Other exposure sites include a petrol station in Gindra, just north of the Victorian-New South Wales border.
There weren't lots and lots of people going through, but there's always the potential.
Regional Victoria was largely protected from the worst of Melbourne's outbreak last year, thanks to the ring of steel around the city. These cases in Barwon Heads are the first in the Geelong region since September. While all of Victoria will go into lockdown, unaffected regions may get an early mark.
We will release those parts of regional Victoria that it is safe to release before next Tuesday, if it is safe to do so.
The removalists who brought the virus into Victoria from New South Wales are now subject to a criminal investigation and could be fined in multiple jurisdictions.
If it turns out that they get an infringement notice because they failed to comply in our area, that they failed to wear a mask in our area, that's exactly what we'll be.
That may be of little comfort to Victorians who are once again paying the price. Stephen Schubert, ABC News, Barwon Heads.